So this is pretty funny, if you think that you and I would have first have met in Notting Hill Gate, where you had better badges, back in very early 1979. We're now sitting outside in the Catskill Mountains because we both lived in America for a long time and stayed in touch. And I'm catching you right now as you're flicking through this Best of Jamming book.
It's the Jamming
Fanzine
podcast.
I mean, the thing about a fanzine was holding it in your hand, right? And looking at the way it had been put together, and the punk way it had been put together, quite frankly. And it had a staple in it, and that is a fanzine, right?
Episode 3, Image as Virus.
Tony Fletcher here, and welcome to episode 3 of the Jamming Fanzine podcast. We started this show to coincide with the new book, The Best of Jamming, Selections and Stories from the Fanzine That Grew Up, 1977 to 86, published by Omnibus Press and available pretty much everywhere at this point. The Jamming Fanzine podcast, however, is a standalone show. It's an opportunity to have conversations with writers, photographers, musicians, label and record store types, and other people who were around the culture of those times. Most episodes will feature myself as former publisher and editor of Jamming in a Zoom conversation with two or more, hopefully like-minded people that may or may not have met each other before, and will tackle a specific aspect of the culture, as you'll know if you listen to the first two episodes, from classroom to clubs and mods and sods. This time out, though, the conversation is one-on-one and in person. As you'll have heard from the introduction, Joly MacFie and I go back several decades to when I was just 14 years old. Joly, often known just by that single name, was proprietor of Better Badges, the seminal printer of pretty much all the button badges you would have seen on lapels and satchels and shirts and ties back in the late 70s and early 80s, not just across the UK, but probably in the States as well. Joly estimates that over his 7 years of running Better Badges, he printed some 40 million of these pins, as they are called in the States, in total. That initial meeting between Joly and myself was one of those serendipitous occasions that had lasting benefits for the both of us. By an additional coincidence, after each of our businesses imploded in the 1980s, and in the interview that follows, Joly extrapolates perfectly the kind of problems we both faced as creative entrepreneurs turned hapless businessmen, I should probably say. We both ended up in New York City, where we frequently ran into each other all the way through the 1990s. I moved upstate in the early 21st century, and fast forward to September 2021, Joly was vacationing in the Catskill Mountains near where I do live, and so I hand-delivered his Best of Jamming, and we sat down, perused through it along with some original copies of the 6 issues that he printed at Better Badges, and had ourselves a conversation that pretty much traced Joly's entire life. It has been edited for length and additionally filtered to minimise the sound of the passing stream. If you can hear any of our cut and pastes, well hey, that's fanzines for you. As it happens, I'm recording this intro from a different set of mountains, the Andes in Colombia, yes, the country, where I'm on a writing retreat and where I'm rather appalled to have heard myself on the intro generically reference America at the start of our talk when I should have specifically said the USA. They take that kind of thing seriously in Latin America, as well they should. The Robin you will hear mentioned is Robin Richards, who was intrinsically involved in the design of Jamming. Neil at Smash Hits should probably be Nick Logan, who went on to found The Face. Sherwood is Adrian Sherwood, an important dub industrial music producer. Keith would be Keith Levine of Public Image Limited and more, and you should be able to fill in any other gaps yourself. We pick up the conversation with Joly, an inveterate hippie active in the 1970s free festival scene, having just printed his first badges at one such festival in Devon, right at the point of the new subculture, that of punk rock, comes along and intersects with his hippie ideals. I'll pop back at the end to round things up and tell you how to find Joly online and what we have coming down the pike. Enjoy Image as Virus with Better Badges, Joly MacFie.
Do you want to buy a copy of Jamming?
So you were hitting on something straight away that I think is really important to the whole punk, post-punk, the fanzine culture. the notion of a sort of year zero doesn't hold water. That essentially there were a lot of people involved in the creativity of punk who had been hippies or were still hippies.
I used to say at the time that we got what we wished for. In some, we had the vision kind of thing. I mean, I was a roadie for the Pink Fairies, from 1970, and I'm part of the underground. And then what happened was that things got bad in like 73, 74. You had the oil embargo. You had I was just watching this Lucan movie last night with the garbage piling up outside on the street, the lights going out because of the miners' strike. Things were grim. And what happened was that the music scene at that time died. All the independent record stores practically to a man died. And the only place you could buy music was in Woolworths or Smiths, yeah. But in Woolworths particularly. And so the style of the music actually changed to be a Woolworths style of music, cheap and gaudy, and this was like glam rock was perfectly suited to like a kind of Woolworths reality. And I mean, while glam was very much influential on the young punk, what I would say is that their older brothers were into Hawkwind and the Pink Fairies. And so they kind of inherited that from their older brothers. And by the time 76 rolled around, they were kind of graduating from bubblegum to like more serious stuff. There isn't the difference between punk and hippie in England. I mean, and it's kind of reunited at crusty punks in the 80s. And meanwhile, English hippie had diverged into two kind of things. And one had always been this kind of one lot that was the Aquarians, live healthy, and this lot, and the other lot were the cocaine takers, the White Panthers, the rock and roll and fucking in the streets, kind of exemplified by Mick Farren and his whole philosophy. And so all this bad scene happened. There was nothing going on. I mean, we all went off to listen to like Weather Report and stuff at that time. The scene was dead, and eventually it sort of revived from nothing into pub rock because the only place people could pay was in the back rooms of the pubs by about 75. And
sure, people like me have been listening to music since I was 8 years old anyway. It wasn't like I didn't know about hippie culture, but the more I've had the chance to reflect, I've realized that the young punks needed people who had a little bit of experience in trying to run a business.
In IT and Friends and so on, there was a thriving underground press, and Mick Farren adopting John Sinclair, language of, free music and all this kind of thing. Fuck the system. There was this kind of thing that we'd had this idea kind of then. What happened was that by about 73, as I said, things got bad. Meanwhile, this friend of ours, H, opened Dingwalls and gave everybody a job. And that was when the Pink Fairies stopped because they all got work as bartenders and cooks and DJs at Dingwalls, And all the underground press died in that time. But meanwhile, the old underground press people got jobs with the mainstream music press.
I want to say, though, you were part of that underground press as well with IT, correct?
At that time, yeah, a sort of revived one. I was the music editor of IT in 77. There was a revolution in technology at that time. The Japanese had sold everybody twin cassette decks. Xerox, there was the thing, instant print started. Xerox got cheaper. And so never before in human history had the general public been able to reproduce things, especially audio. It was letterpress or nothing. A litho plate cost £100, in those days. That was what enabled the whole thing. I mean, it would have happened because of that technology, because DIY technology enabled peer-to-peer.
It probably began with the kind of thing where a friend would just record an album for you at school because you didn't have the money.
It was on cassette. It was basically John Peel and twin cassette decks.
Yeah.
And smart bands understood this, and like Susie and the Banshees, that didn't sign the deal and held off. And meanwhile, every school playground there was in the country, there were people swapping
Banshee's Peel sessions. Yeah, Peel absolutely. Because I was at school, and it was. I mean, that stuff was seminal. Unsigned bands.
Love and Avoid.
Yeah. And those versions. I mean, so many Peel sessions were better in the Peel sessions than on the record.
The Slits one did well too.
Yeah, the Slits ones were amazing, but particularly bands that took a while to get signed. Those sessions were utterly.
Meanwhile,
legendary.
Nils is out there painting "Sign the Banshees" on sort of bridges and roads.
Right. So you got the badges going as a sort of an entity. It's
So
funny
then
you started
after
off
that-
with your Hendrix and your
and then so I did Stonehenge, and then I came to London, and I had a thing where I'd got this job somehow painting Eric Idle's kitchen, and I'd subcontracted it to my friend Mike Williams. He was in there doing it, and so I went to London, and so that's in St John's Wood, and so I'm there, and Patti Smith had just played, and the Roundhouse, and I saw that was a big deal, and I'd missed that, and then I went to playing with the Fairies was Martin Stone, who was from Chilly Willy, who was my friend, and so I saw he was playing with the 101ers, so I went to see Martin play with the 101ers at the Fulham Broadway place. I went in the dressing room, and in the dressing room, drummer, who I kind of knew because he lived next door to me in Walterton Road, he announced to the band that he was jacking it in to go off and do this other band, and basically punk rock kind of thing. And I remember standing outside after the show with him at the bus stop outside this place and saying, "Yeah, this is good stuff. I'm going to do this too." And that was when I kind of made the decision to jump onto punk. Was
right.
standing outside the Fulham.
Would it be the Fulham Greyhound or?
The Greyhound was the one that was up the block.
Right.
Fulham
Okay.
Broadway was the Fulham Power. I forget what it was. And so the Ramones were playing the Roundhouse July 4th. I designed a Ramones badge, and with Johnny Ramone, was the most iconic Ramone. And I went down there, and I managed to talk my way in. Amazingly, John Curd, who of course, I didn't know him, but he had connections, and he said, he looked at it and said, "All right then." And there was a stand between the toilets at the Roundhouse and Des Kay, who sold Tantra badges, all the Tantra designs. He sold Rizzlers, he sold, the sort of hippie stall. And he said, "You can set up at the edge of that." And there is a photograph of somewhere of that. And I sold Ramones badges, and that was from then, as you say, I never looked back.
Right. So you ended up running Better Badges in Notting Hill, and I can really not remember you in Notting Hill, but that is where I came to see you. And I had done 4 issues at school, and then I'd done 2 issues with 2 different printers, and I was up against a brick wall trying to figure out how to keep this fanzine going, because for all that you're saying, peer-to-peer, etc., the cost of printing was such that to print less than 1,000 copies was crazy prohibitive.
Right.
But I came to you for an ad.
Yeah.
I came to you just because I was like, anybody who could just give me 20 quid for a full page ad.
So I'll say this. The key thing to making badges, and at the time that I got, was process camera, PMT camera. It's a huge ass camera, lights at the side, in which you could enlarge and reduce something. It's not, it's not understood now that at that time you could not make stuff larger or smaller. Even Xeroxes that made stuff were larger and smaller were just coming in, didn't come into a year or 2 later. And so first the printer that I went to, Letterstream, let me use theirs. Then I got one on the Never Never. And this also served as a magnet for, everybody would come to me to do their single covers and all this, to do all their artwork. And badges took off in a big way. And just going back to the point that I made earlier, driven by shows, that we did the Roundhouse show, and then when things moved to Electric Ballroom, it was very much driven by that. We didn't deal with record companies whatsoever until the rough trades and mutes of the factories of this world. It was just a question of what are the fans, what do they want to buy this week? What can we do that's good? You know what I mean? That looks good. And some of it was just sheet fillers. And anyway, everything went good. And then one day I'm sitting on the doorstep. I'm just going to go a bit long here. But one day I'm sitting on the doorstep of Portobello Road, and the skinhead comes up and talks to me, and from Ladbroke Grove Skins, and he says, yeah, we could do some of that. And he hand drew me a Ladbroke Grove Skins badge, LGS, and another one that was Skinheads Reggae, with Skinheads white on black, and Reggae white, black on white. And that was the first two-tone badge. And probably in late 78. By 79, two-tone had taken over. So two-tone was very easy to reproduce. And so suddenly we found ourselves being bootlegged. My badge, we weren't the only game in town. Badges were appearing on every street corner. It was Carnaby Street, whatever. And so the whole thing was being devalued as a sort of hip underground medium that my slogan, image is virus, disease is cure, and so on, was going out the window. So that was one of the real reasons why I decided to get into fanzines. We'd always sold fanzines on the badge store. I wanted to associate badges closer to fanzines in order that they'd be seen as, to differentiate them from the junk.
Right.
At the same time, a salesman from Ronio Vickers showed up and said, yeah, we do this tabletop litho machine. And I said, okay, fine. And rented the basement room to put it in. And then I set about teaching myself I needed to learn to print. And that is about the point when you walked in.
But I think that before you actually offered to print the fanzine, you said, I have this camera that I can actually do the artwork for you, because the artwork on issue 6 was so terrible, because this company had, where we tried to lay things out, they half-toned entire pages. Yeah. And you probably took a look and said, well, this is awful. I can actually do this better. And I said, well, that's a start.
Yeah.
And then very, very quickly, because I was for at least a week or two still trying to find printers, and I think you said, you know what, guinea pig. My recollection is that you said, I've got this new litho press.
Yeah.
I need to test it out.
You happened to walk in the same day as, probably almost to the day when this guy from Ronio Vickers walked in. And
so the idea was you were going to be able to I guess, change either the printing on your badges or up the printing on your badges or print more paper.
Save money, yeah.
Right.
And also become more agile.
Right. And you made me this great offer, because I look back on it, and now to some extent everybody creates their own luck. I had the audacity or the guts or whatever to come into your office and say, would you take that out? So I get the credit for that. But you get the credit for the fact that I was coming up against a brick wall, and I'm not really sure what would have happened with jamming. I had the enthusiasm, but you couldn't get anywhere with printers. What are they going to do? You go in and speak to them, and they say, well, it's going to cost you this much. You're a kid off the street. There was very, very little, and the Xeroxing was not cheap either.
Well, people did it on their, in their mum's office and things.
Exactly. I didn't have access to that, so I was now
being not into things illegal for obvious reasons.
Yeah, I just didn't have access. So, and it was beyond being a school fanzine. So I was really, really stuck. And so when you said, guinea pig, I'll just charge you cost, and we'll try and do this together. What came out, which was that Jamming 7, was actually not a great print job, but it saved the fanzine.
If you look at it, probably you can see the pages that I started printing versus the ones at the end. I got progressively better. On the first page, I'd never printed. I would have done the cover afterwards, but on the first page, I'd never printed anything in my life.
But as I know in this Best of Jamming book, I think we probably threw away as many pages as we printed. I mean, I just remember you'd be like, I can do it better than this. I can do it better. And what was meant to be a weekend, I think you said, come up on Saturday and Sunday, and we'll print this off.
Story of my life.
And about 2 weeks later, we're like, hey, we actually have 1,000 copies of a fanzine. Yeah, I mean, that's the same one, just stapled.
So this is the same.
That's the same issue.
Same issue.
But then what did definitely happen is he said, you know what, I print badges in more than one colour. So if you don't mind just using whatever colour I've got available, we can have some fun. Jamming 8 is when it really came together, the new group special.
So in between this and that is when I'd actually bought printing presses.
Mm-hmm.
And I brought these from a store that was going out of business in Covent Garden. And I got the guy who sold them to me and his brother came to work for me as printers. Mike, who was a born-again Christian, whose sole thing was promoting his wife as a born-again Christian singer. And Pete, his brother, who was a Millwall fan. who continued to work for Better Badges for many years.
So you made a very conscious decision, you're telling me. It wasn't just like, oh, I've got this particular machine to do badges, I can print fanzines. It sounds like you were more saying, there's a fanzine culture, if I print badges, why can't I print fanzines? Let's really try
I just worked it out. I mean, I'll track this also back to the day when I threw out royalties on badges, which was, via Rob Gretton and Factory, when, Gretton persuaded me to forget about trying to pay royalty on badges. And he said, and this was because they couldn't make up their minds whether to give badges, the Joy Division badges, factory numbers, make them, because everything at Factory had a number. So they said, fanzines is what's coming back at us, and badges is what's coming back at us as well. It's not what we're putting out, it's what's coming back at us. And the way we do projects is, is we use projects to fund other projects. And so you'd be better off, we don't need the money, we'd rather you give the money to the next band coming in the door, and do a deal, do a setup where, and I said, yeah, that makes sense to me too. So I threw out trying to account royalties and just said, any band that comes in the door with their badge, we give them 200 free badges. We've got the simple rate structure, 5p to make, 10p to the store, 20p to the public. And so I worked out that I would do the same thing with fanzines, and it would, but basically it was 2p a sheet, double-sided, and was the cost of making. So, and then, so this meant that a 10-sheet fanzine like yours, I think cost 20.
Well,
so I don't know how we managed the finances of it, because you've got...
Right, well, after that issue 7, which was, passable, when we did this one, you said, well, I'll still do it for, I still need you as a guinea pig, because, we didn't pull it off last time. But so so whether Jamming 8 was consciously printed at cost because I was already bringing you fanzines, or whether you said, the last one didn't really come out the way I wanted, we'll do this one at cost, and then and then just point people my way. I remember that when I went around with that one, it was the first one that sold out. It was the first one that just felt totally right. It tied in with a very, very vibrant summer of 1979. And all of a sudden, anybody who was running a fanzine said, how the hell did you get that printed? But my memory of spending that 1979 with you is a lot of time spent either at Rough Trade or at Fifth Column, which was up in Kilburn, or inside 286 Portobello Road, having a good time. We would work well together on this. We would pull some late nights. I'd eventually say, I've got to get the last tube home, or I've got to get a tube.
I remember your mother coming to the door. That's what I remember.
And my mum would come and pick up the finished fanzines, because somehow they had to get all the way back to what would have actually at that point still been around the Gypsy Hill area, West Dulwich. I mean, what else can you tell people who are listening about 286 Better Badges? I remember your cat.
Jimmy.
Yeah.
Jimmy used to crap. One of the key things of the badge business was buckets. We had these yellow buckets that we bought from the hardware store, in which we had badges, and Jimmy the cat used to crap in these buckets of badges. So you never knew when you put your hand into one of these things what you were going to hit. But I started Better Badges basically in a garage in St Stephen's Mews, and then as I got bigger, I went to 286, talked them into renting me the top floor. I kept the garage for production. Then I moved the stock into the basement and moved production in, and we got the room. Moved the camera and everything in the middle floor.
That's what
I remember. It was in the old bathroom. Camera was in the old bathroom, and then we got the front room for the designs. We had 3 floors.
That's what I remember. Where did you live?
2.5 floors.
Yeah. Did you live on the top floor?
Crashed in one room on the top floor for a bit. I used to work all night, and then I would go to the Portchester Turkish baths and sleep off during the day while the staff came in and worked. And
my routine would probably have been I'd come to see you after school.
Yeah.
Because I did have school, and I would come in the afternoons, and we'd work on not so much the layout, but doing the camera work, and then I would have to leave you to catch tubes and buses home.
I calculated that as I left in '82, I calculated I'd made 40 million badges.
40 million badges.
Yeah, in those 4 years, and I didn't make a whole lot in the first year. So really,
6 years. You said 76, 82.
76 or 82, yeah, 6 years.
No,
but it was really,
wow.
During that kind of time, we used to run 50,000 a week on the badges. It was short-lived, but it was quite intense.
Well, you
Production.
cannot underestimate the importance. The badges were, you often mention the image as virus, but I mean, for kids, it was just as simple as the badge is the message.
It's something that I used to point out to fanzine people, and it's very aware of that. Badges you could print, up to 48 on a sheet, one sheet of paper, one-sided, and sell it for 20p. A fanzine you had to print 20 sheets, 10 sheets, double-sided, and it sold for the same money. So it makes a statement about information, and even now.
Because people can make a statement with it? Is that your answer? Because people are willing to pay 25p to make a visual statement on their lapel?
And the fact that it's a token, it's an encapsulation, and it's a token. And I very much in my badge designs used to try and make things that were very much of a piece. Do you know what I mean? But people come to badges, and even when I came to badges, they start thinking at it and they look, okay, before we came into badges, you couldn't do graphics. People just did letterpress and slogans. So they think about slogans. You can make badges. You can go and make badges of what's the top 10, Madonna or whatever, you know what I mean? And nobody wants to buy them. But if you make badges of the band down the street, the whatever, then people will buy them.
Right.
It's a leverage,
And there are other aspects to it, because a lot of people would take badges for promo. So I mean, record companies might come to you and just pay you to print badges.
Yeah.
And there would be promo.
I mean, this was part of the premise of Better Badges, was that, and what started me on the route to Better Badges was that I had a Jimi Hendrix I'm Experienced badge that was this big, that Boss from the Pink Fairies gave me, and someone stole it, and I realised that there was no way to replace it. And at the same time, and something that Crass later expressed as you pay, but you, the punter, pay for the badge that the record label gives to someone else.
Mm-hmm.
So the whole idea of Better Badges was that you paid for the badge and you got the badge, and then you promoted what you wanted to promote. You weren't at the mercy of what was coming down at you. It was people, setting the agenda.
And that's partly because the badges look so cool. I mean, they were collector's items in their own way. Do you have this particular Clash badge? Or I think you've hit on something. Why were you able to sell a single badge that you could print 48 on one sheet for the same price as a fanzine? I think fanzines were unfortunately had to compete with the Enemy and Sounds, etc., that were printing 250,000 a week and selling for 25p. So the moment that you charge more than a music paper, you had to be so much better than that music paper. So for me, I was always trying to come in at much the same cost as a music paper, like, here's your alternative. But if you started charging double what the music paper cost, people would say, well, I'd sooner just buy Sounds and Enemy. You were always up against a little bit of that.
Well, but by the same token, it was underground, and by being underground, that's what gave it the value.
Yeah.
As you grew bigger...
Oh yeah, the second half of the book, particularly the last third of this book, you can see us wrestling with it continually. I mean, we're trying. I'm proud of most of it, but eventually it becomes a magazine. You just feel there's this point.
So you're sitting next to Zigzag on the newsstand.
That's Zigzag. So at least we're sitting next to. I mean, to some degree, we are just a monthly magazine.
Yeah.
We're not the underground. Yeah. We're cool. We're quite a good magazine, but where's the urgency in it?
Talk about the end of jamming. Then how did it end?
Oh, it ended badly. It ended like a really good band breakup, meaning like a bad band breakup. I mean, it's all there, and I wrote a full page on the issue 36 about it. I'd handed over the reins to partly because I've been getting involved in some other things, and there was this idea of me sort of moving upstairs, becoming like that sort of more like a publisher, and we could do different ventures. Right. And underneath, and with the people that had made the journey with me, who I then who then stepped in as editors, I just felt like this was no longer. We suddenly lacked all the vibrancy. We lacked everything.
The ethos.
The ethos was gone. But there was also a sort of unfortunate degree of that competition that can happen. And I found that underneath me, people were that there were feuds. I guess there was like, look, if you're not editor anymore, get out of the way, which is understandable. But then I was also running into people who go, yeah, jamming's kind of just like lost it. Yeah, it's lost its mojo, which is sort of a deliberate pun on
but
another
the scene
monthly.
changed as well, right?
Yeah, so we're talking now, you're at the end of 1985. We've gone through the miners' strike.
Yeah.
We've gone through
You've
politicisation. We've done all of that.
You went a lot longer than me. You see,
Yeah. Yeah.
What happened to me was that, I had a VIC 20 or whatever, and, a Spectrum. I got, in 1980, I had a ZX Spectrum, and I looked at this, and you could get a modem for it, and I figured out, hey, if we can do this online, we won't need these piles of magazines to pass around notes at the back of class. And so I could see that it would be online, and and meanwhile I was kind of burnt out, and the scene changed under me. It went from basically punk rock to new romantic, and
There was a massive scene change. I mean, jamming lasted a long time and was valid for a long time. How long are you going to be urgent? How long is this going to matter?
Yeah.
We were featuring the same bands. The final issue had us featuring New Order, Madness, Prefab Sprout, all bands that had appeared in jamming before. We're just going around in circles. We're treading water, all those kind of cliches.
I mean, with me, when I got to that, I had a guy who was going to come in as a backer, and who was being the publisher of IT, and he was he'd inherited money, had money, and he had his accountants go through all my books. And this is probably in 79 or 80, and they went through it and said, yeah, this looks like a healthy business, but then. And meanwhile, I was beginning to get into cash flow problems. And meanwhile, he decided to put his money into doing a theatre workshop in Bristol instead, and pulled out. And I was in too deep to get out. But one just didn't think and that's the point, is you never really thought about it entrepreneurially. You started doing it creatively, and then you end up being an administrator.
Yeah.
Right.
That's every entrepreneur's story.
Yeah.
You start out with the creative side, and you end up sitting there filling out the books.
Yeah.
And trying to make sure people are getting paid, or making sure the supply is going.
So the accountant said, you can either go bankrupt or you can leave the country. And there was a crazy period when I was kind of like, okay, it's through, but money's still coming in. Do you know what I mean? But you know that it's going to be meaningless, so you're just going to spend all the money because you're going to be bankrupt, whatever. So you might as well spend it while you've got it. Do you know what I mean? It's sort of crazy little period there before I actually got out.
Right.
The mainstream culture had caught up. When you were doing jamming in the early days, if you look at the music press was straight text, black and white photographs that they're given, the image, the straight text, and formal, and then fanzines come in and slap it all together, and it's underground and whatever. And so, the first person to really figure this out was Neil, I guess, with Smash Hits, which was, okay, we'll just print the lyrics and throw in some graphics or, whatever. And I advertised in there, and it worked, very well for me. And but by the time the Face and things like this had come up, they had adopted fanzine style and culture, so you no longer had to go to this for that.
This is very true, and that's actually a point that's not been made to me before, and I appreciate you making that point, because it seems crystal clear, but I've actually never crystallized it. So I think that's a really, really valid point. The inkies were known as inkies for that reason. They were just type, like you said, it was just black ink. And then all of a sudden you're competing with things like the Face that are actually looking pretty stylish. And ID, to its credit, was doing that. But I wanted to read you this part that I saw from the one thing to read you. It's actually from when I did a massive fanzine roundup. This would have been printed January 81. And it's literally the half page is about better badges and fanzines.
You having your rant about me homogenizing fanzines?
Well, no, actually, I'm actually being very, very supportive. I've reread it, and I'm actually quite supportive. If anything, I'm just accusing the fanzines of a lack of originality. I'm saying, so what? There's a supportive printer? Is that, given that there are no other supportive printers, is that a bad thing? I'm going through the issues, that people are saying. Too easy going about things? Well, yeah. They are, but is that, hey...
You said people didn't have the hurdle So,
Yeah.
I didn't have to struggle the way that you struggled.
Right, but here's what I actually said. So I say here, what happens when you take a fanzine in to Better Badges to be printed? Basically, you leave it there with notes of what needs to be done to the artwork. Then after a week, phone up every day when Michael Joly will tell you that it's almost ready until it actually is. This can take any amount of time whatsoever. I actually think that sums it up quite nicely. I mean, you guys were great.
Yeah.
You were at the other end of the phone. You did your very, very best, and sometimes you got it done in a week, and sometimes it took 6 weeks. And
To this day, with my live streaming, with my webcasting and video editing, it's exactly the same story.
yeah, the intentions were very true. I wanted to show
My,
you
my reach always exceeds my.
your vision exceeds your capabilities
No,
or something.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, I wanted to show you the last issue because this will bring back, hopefully, you mentioned to me actually as I was putting this together. So we've gone through, there's more and more colour. Robin's doing the covers, a bit more artwork. But the last one that you did, which was summer of '81, we got to go gatefold. And
so this would be printed on the large rotor print on the A3 printer,
right.
which we'd learned to do from doing ID.
Right, so I'm actually getting the benefit of ID's experience here, of what you've done with ID. But it was another really important step up for jamming. It's still the same, obviously done at Better Badges, still my layout combined with Robin's layout. You can feel all
Same
of that.
typewriter, but a new ribbon.
Sorry?
Same typewriter, but a new ribbon.
You've noticed, yeah. I think I finally got round to replacing my mum's old ribbon. But the gatefold made a nice difference. Somewhere around this period, I also sent Paul Weller your way to print a fanzine.
And so part of the exhibit at NYU of my badges is the actual letter from Paul Weller in original artwork for that. So somehow that has survived.
Is that exhibition on right now? Or?
No, it went on for like 2 weeks, 3 years ago. But once the book is published, and it'll probably be in the book. Once the book is published, there'll be more exhibits.
Right.
So there was a box of stuff that I left with a girlfriend that somehow survived, which has gone to Kevin, which has,
Right, this is Kevin who's putting the book together.
yeah.
Yeah. So I sent Weller your way. I mean, basically he would have said, this guy's printing your fanzines. Can I want to do a fanzine. And at that point...
We were already dealing with John and Anne, I think, on the badges.
Right. But yeah, so you printed Paul Weller's fanzine at the time?
Yeah.
And you were doing literally dozens of fanzines.
I did booklets for Young Marble Giants. I did a booklet for the Raincoats. I printed, Rough Trade's first catalogue, of their stuff. We did the flyers for the Final Solution. Mm-hmm. And we see some of those, like the Joy Division flyer, going for ridiculous amounts.
Are those the Sunday night concerts?
Or
is that John Curd? I'm thinking of Sunday nights at the Lyceum.
No, they used to do Ulu and so on. They did all, Cabaret Voltaire and those kind of. So yeah, they were promoters of kind of post-punk, and we did them all with the color wash on them. So they're kind of, they're kind of unique.
And ultimately, you moved to the States, and I moved a few years later, and sure enough, I found you showing up at gigs with your badges. Pins, as we call them here.
I went to California, and with the idea of, online. And I got there, and Z Records in Long Beach paid my ticket. I'd shipped them a box full of badge print, and so they paid for me to go out and put me up when I got there. And what I found was, with my VIC-20 and 300 baud modem, was that the people who were online in California were a bunch of hippies. And what's more, the main thing was a thing called The Well up in San Francisco. And these people had a slogan which was, "You own your own words." And the whole idea of images virus and they were the antithesis. And so they just didn't make sense at all. In fact, Mike Zampelli, who was the son of who ran the record store Zed's, ended up running the biggest BBS in Southern California. He picked it up and so on. And meanwhile, I went to see Motorhead at Billy Barty's Roller Disco next to Disneyland, and the promoter there was. I saw the promoter, and he had a big bag of weed, and he said, "Yeah, and we've got Crass is coming." And I went up to him, and I said, "Look, I'll give you John Loder's phone number off the top of my head. Crass is not coming to Southern California. And, give me some of that weed and I'll tell you." And for that, I became the booker for Golden Voice.
Okay. All right.
And I said to him, "You don't have to bring these bands from California. Through New York. You can just bring them in here." And we did that was in the summer of '83, and I left in early '85. And so we did a that was what put Golden Voice on the map, was that 1.5 year. Gary was a weed dealer, and he loved punk rock with a passion, and we did these incredible shows, like CBGB's, but like 4,000 people, and we also brought in Batcave and all this kind of stuff. So
then when did you move to New York City?
So I did that, and then we came to New York to the New Music Seminar, and I hooked up with Sherwood was there, and he was just recruiting Tackhead and Levine, and I talked to Levine.
Keith Levine?
Yeah, Keith Levine, and I said to him, and I DJ'd the Pill shows, the original Pill shows at the Rainbow. I said to him, what I liked, was doing sound system, and I was doing incredible sound system at these big Olympic shows in California. I was playing dub reggae and rocking it out between the Circle Jerks and Black Flag. And so I said, we should do sound system, a band that has no band. In London, one of the things that Better Badges did was run the dub club.
Yeah, we also were intrinsically involved in DBC, Dread Broadcasting Corporation, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's another story.
Yeah.
But we ran, so Kurt started doing the shows at Clarendon. So then we started hiring the Talbot Tabernacle, strewing this Heats equipment around the room, and then basically playing cassettes. And then we'd invite people, so it would be the Slits versus the Flying Lizards, or Rough Trade versus whatever, and having sort of like little sound system clashes, and then messing with them, where we put analog echo on this and that and speaker over there and so on. So I'd done this kind of sound system thing there in London, the Dub Club. And so I went to Levine, and Levine liked this. And so I came back to New York. I started coming back to New York to hang out with him to plan this out. And meanwhile, he got interested in what I was doing. And then he started, and so we actually ended up swapping over. As I came to New York, he ended up he went to California and started hanging out with the Red Hot Chili Peppers and became a skateboarding kid. And so this never happened. The other thing was that what I realized promoting in California was that the key to America is television. And Steve-O from Some Bizarre had got a TV show on USA Network. And so I was, how the hell did Steve-O get a national TV show in America? I had no place to live in New York. And so what I did was what I always do, is go and live in the Turkish bath. And the Turkish bath had this crazy situation where the owner had died, the son had taken it over, the son was completely feckless, and lunatics were running the asylum. So I was able to live there, basically in return for like washing the towels. And about the second or third day, the guy I met was Stuart Shapiro, who was the producer of Night Flight, who was the people who put out Steve-O's show. And he said to me, go and talk to Fran Duffy. And I went and talked to Fran Duffy, and Fran Duffy, and eventually ended up moving into Fran Duffy's. And once I got in there, I graduated with Commodore 64. I set that up and hooked that up with John Loder in England. And Loder and I had a conversation in California too about this. And he said, I'm going to put a TV studio into Southern Studios. Set up, and so we were talking, and then from that we set up a thing called Snub TV.
That's right, I remember Snub, remember it well.
Snub TV,
yeah.
Which people in England will deny ever had an American existence before it had an English existence.
Yeah, no, I know it did, for sure.
And so we set up Snub TV, and I promoted Snub TV online using MCI Mail and Western Union EasyLink. And the thing was that you could send via MCI mail to Western Union EasyLink, and Western Union EasyLink, you could access all the telex machines. So the whole music business of this stuff ran on these importers like Dutch East and whoever.
Yeah.
So I would run the whole lineup of the show before it went out, a week before it went out. So it chunta came out of their telex machines, and did this really, and we had good ratings and did really well with that. And they always had the records. They knew what was going to be on snub. They knew to tape it, all the record stores and so on. So that was actually a pretty successful campaign.
Yeah.
Again, financed by some drug guys that Fran had tapped for some money.
Right.
But produced on $2,000 a show. When I first got here, I suddenly got sick. And I had chronic fatigue disease. I could not stand up. I went to an exploited show at CBGB, and there the exploited show was Dodgy Brian. And Dodgy Brian was a Better Badges customer who distributed to all the stores, all the Virgin stores in Scotland. And he was there merching the exploited. And he said, I'm setting up a t-shirt printing thing in New York. Come on in. So I went to this t-shirt printing. He had a t-shirt printing set on 205 West 14th, 14th and 7th Avenue.
Yeah.
Sheridan Square with that t-shirt thing on the corner.
Right.
So anyway, I went in there, fell on the ground and couldn't stand up. Literally could not stand up. And, who knows, what caused it. So there were Japanese guys in the front room, also printing t-shirts, who sold t-shirts on the Hard Rock Cafe t-shirts on the street. The Japanese guy took me in and raised me back to health. Over 9 months or something, it took me to get back into shape. So I helped them sell t-shirts on the street. And then there was a girl here who'd been Nancy Breslow, who'd been my agent here, and she had a stock of badges, so I got those badges. And I was outside Second Coming on St. Mark's, In England, I went from that roundhouse stand to 40 million badges, 50 grand in debt. I said, I'm never going to do that again. So it was never much more than me. I had occasional helpers. So I just did.
Yeah. I think you kind of learn from those things.
I was better off I'd be better off if I just kept doing the roundhouse stand and never done all the rest of it. Though I learned my own limitations.
Yeah, I mean, I hear that because I ended up with debts from jamming as well. As maybe a good place. Funny enough, this is still going to be 30 years ago, but it's a good place to sort of take it on how your spirit was always your spirit. I was running that club night at the Limelight in the 90s, and lots of people would sort of communion. Lots of people would want in on the action, but you would simply show up, set up your badges, and start selling them, and no permission from anybody. I mean, it was irrelevant really that you knew me, because you'd been doing that even if you didn't know me. You just walked on in to Peter Gayson's Limelight, set up your badge store. Yeah. You had your badges.
Well, there were
a
few people there. There were a few other people selling odd jewellery and so on.
Yeah, but most of them.
I remember there was this guy Buzz.
Yeah, but most of those people asked for permission first, and your sort of anarchist spirit, hippie spirit, was such that you would just be like, "Oh, I'm setting up here." I'd be like, "Oh, hi, Joly." And for me, it's it just circles back round to funny the journey that we ended up taking from me walking into what I guess was the Notting Hill place back in probably the very start of 1979 to being here in 2021.
Yeah, there are occasionally, there are other people like this that I kept running into all my life. Val from the Electric Chairs, I went to school with. He was in the class below me at school. Then he shows up, playing with the Rockets, and before even the garage, when I was at John Manley's, he was there, and then he worked for me on mail order. And I ended up in California, and I ran into him, and he's working as a bike messenger. Right.
Right. Well, sometimes these relationships are important, and like I say, we end up doing sort of similar things. Maybe attracted to the idea of restarting in New York City, and we've both been very much about communication of one way in shape or form. So I guess the paths are going to keep crossing.
At the Ritz pin stand, I used to do a thing called the pin test, where I would make badges of the support band or whoever, to like shock them, and then coming to see what they did when they discovered that there were someone in the basement selling their badges, right? And and so sort of 9 out of 10 would say, "Oh, those are great. Can we have some?" But 1 out of 10 would say, "How dare you? Who gave you all sort of authority to make those or whatever? You're ripping us off." And those people, you could say, either they were going to die immediately or they were going to become top 40. Do you know what I mean?
I know exactly what you mean. I know 100% what you mean. They were either going all the way or, but they were not part of the indie spirit.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I fully.
And it was a thing that, when I threw out royalties originally, that the bands that was the bands that were selling well were the people who came around asking for royalties were not the people that were selling the badges were selling.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
The ones that came in and said, "Yeah, just do more of it."
Well, I think Rob Gretton is the prime example. He's like,
but the Clash was a good example too, basically. I mean, the Clash was a funny thing. I did like this really horrible badge, and Bernie Rhodes hated it with a vengeance. And then so he came round and did a deal where I could repro the police badge if I got rid of that.
Right.
But basically, I paid them some money to take their van to Europe the first time. That was the deal with Bernie. So, but after that, they never asked for money. The police, we did all their stuff. They never asked for money. So.
Well, I have to wrap this up, but I gotta say, it's lovely just to be sitting here in such a different environment. But I do particularly look back. I guess it would be sort of 1979 when was just like a really good year, and spending a lot of time in that dark room with you, in that camera room, and everything seemed to roll off the presses, and jamming just took off leaps and bounds in the space of 2 to 3 issues. It went from being like, I'll never get another issue out, to this is the happening fanzine, and a lot of it's right place,
and
right time.
Panache was pretty happening.
Yeah, but it was happening for me. And so, our stories were connected that way. So some of those are on the front cover of the book. And, it's lovely to talk with you about it.
Yeah, I'm sorry I didn't write anything. I thought about it, but it never crystallized in my mind what I wanted to say. I would have done this was the breaking time of technology thing. You know what I mean? Yeah. That's my main input.
Well, we get it on a form of digital tape instead.
So Tony here again. I have to say, listening back to that interview, I learned so much there. Very often when you're in the thick of things, you kind of just take so much for granted. You don't have the wide angle view. You're not far enough removed to really know what's going on. And to hear Joly go through really his entire life, but specifically what went on at Better Badges and what's gone on since, I learned enormously. And I think Joly was great at being able to describe some of the issues that we both went through in our own kind of creative environments. As you would well expect, Joly remains very, very active in the online world, and you can find him at punkcast.com. You can find him active on Facebook and on various groups on Facebook, including Subculture ones and Better Badges ones. I will supply links in the show notes. That's the thing that's sitting on your phone or on your computer, laptop, with more information about the show. Similarly, there's lots of information about the best of jamming, selections and stories from the fanzine that grew up, 1977 to 86. It's not just a reprint in full color of various previous issues and greatest hits. There's also fresh copies supplied by myself, by various contributors and musicians and other people who were around. And it has a foreword by Billy Bragg. We've got several other interviews already recorded for this show. It got kind of really busy around publication of the book. The way things stand right now, I think the next episode will probably be called The Politics of Fanzines. But you never know. We'll see which one actually makes most sense as we get a little closer down the line. The show does drop every other Thursday, and I'll leave my friend Jenny, who I've known all the way back since I was, 14, 15, and I'll leave her to read the credits. And thank you so much for listening.
This episode of the Jamming Fanzine podcast was produced by Tony Fletcher. Greg Morton provided editing assistance and designed the logo. The Jamming Fanzine podcast theme was written, recorded and produced by Noel Fletcher. The book The Best of Jamming, Selections and Stories from the Fanzine That Grew Up, 1977 to 86, is published by Omnibus Press and is available right now across Europe, and then in the rest of the world from the 2nd of December 2021. For more information, please visit tonyfletcher.net or omnibuspress.com. Check the show notes for more details, and if you like what you hear, please hit subscribe, leave a review, a rating or share. We'll be back on the podcast stands in 2 weeks, bringing back that new optimism of the 80s, hopefully.